This is The Baseline, discussing the hot button topics of the NBA.
Welcome, everybody. You are tuned to The Baseline. Cal Lee, Warren Shaw, discussing the hot button topics of the NBA as we have hit the midway point by games of the NBA season. A lot of stuff to get into, a lot of things to discuss. Great basketball being played, great names to be mentioned. But of course, to break all of the good stuff that's happening in the association, I got to do it with my right-hand man, 50 grand NBA aficionado, Don contributor, writer for one of the illest websites, www.shawsports.net, the Big Kahuna and PNC. My man, Mr. Warren Shaw, repping down there in sunny Fort Lauderdale, Florida, because it's snowing right now up there in Jersey. What's going on, brother?
Well, salute to all the fans, listeners of The Baseline, and hope you are enjoying another great week of NBA basketball. We have an amazing show on tap, which my man CL will get into, but I'm not in the snow right now. It's a little cooler in South Florida, it's in the 60s, I guess, so I guess that's cold for down here. I'm enjoying it. People got their minks and their fur coats and their Tim boots on right now. Walling out a little bit, but we're not in the midst of the snow like you might
man, but hopefully, knock on wood, we will have a quiet winter. Thus far, we have not had the misfortunes of snow and ice all happening at the same time. But one thing can be rest assured. Before we blink our eye, the spring summer will turn in, and it looks like the way that the NBA is heating up thus far this year, we may be talking about the seasonal change a lot sooner than later. So with us this week, and a great show that we have lined up for you, we have Ben Bolch, who is a beat writer for the LA Times. He's on tap to join us in a few moments to talk about the Los Angeles Clippers, why this is a team that people are not talking about, but have recently reasserted themselves to being one of those teams that we should be talking about as we start furthering into the NBA season, and how they're doing it without their big man, Blake Griffin. So we have him on tap to help us break all of that down. And then, of course, in our segment of The Drop, we have a really interesting topic, just relations, what we consider our midseason report. I mean, basically, we're looking at teams that have really surprised us this year, probably have exceeded expectations, didn't anticipate the kind of success that they've been able to yield out thus far. And then we'll also talk about teams who have been disappointing, teams who have really fallen below those expectations that we've had for them. We'll get into those teams, a lot to discuss, and so much more. Of course, our Coast to Coast, where we go over the news that's happening in the association. So we appreciate each and every single one of you guys hopping on with us, listening in, and staying tuned. You know how you get at my man Shaw, at Shaw Sports NBA on the Twitter handle, or you can get at me at GameFace Lee. But we always encourage you to get the show's Twitter handle at NBA_The Baseline, hashtag up the baseline. Let us know who you are, what you're about. Available on all the major platforms, available on the Microsoft TuneIn, available on Stitcher Radio, iTunes, and Player FM. So download any one of those platforms and allow us to be your go-to resource discussing all things NBA. You know how we do, and you know how we like to set it off. It's time now for the breakdown.
Time to break it
down to the bone gristle.
Time now for the breakdown. Cal Lee, Warren Shaw of the Baseline NBA Podcast. And this week, the topic of conversation is one of the hottest teams that's flying under the radar, actually, because of what the Golden State Warriors are doing, not just in the NBA, but also within the Pacific Division. And that's the play of the Los Angeles Clippers. And this is a team who I don't think people are giving enough credit, given the situation that's happened over the last couple of months. But to help us get better perspective on what this team is accomplishing, what they're trying to do, and what they're capable of doing, we have our man, Ben Bolch, who's a part of the LA Times. He is a great beat writer, and he keeps his finger on the pulse of all things happening with the LA Clippers. Ben, thanks for joining us this week on The Baseline.
Oh, thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
Ben, at the beginning of this season, we all knew that the kind of roster that Doc Rivers would put together was a team that really, above all means, on paper, looked like the kind of team that, no question, they should be vying for an opportunity to be playing in the Western Conference Finals. And at the beginning of this season, we just didn't know whether or not this team was even capable of possibly making the playoffs. And ever since the injury of Blake Griffin, I don't know what magic potion Doc Rivers has slipped in these guys' drink, but clearly these guys are sipping on the kind of Kool-Aid that just reeks success for the Clippers and has rejuvenated the mindset that this is a successful basketball team. What is it that you're seeing on the court from the players, their demeanor since the Griffin injury that's giving, writers, fans out there in LA rejuvenated hope that this team is actually the kind of team that we talked about at the beginning of the season?
Yeah, I think it's a couple of things. I think you need to start with increase in playing time for Cole Aldrich and Pablo Prigioni, and really kind of rejuvenating that second unit that was a mess basically for the first 6 weeks of the season when Doc Rivers was taking a long, hard look at Lance Stevenson and Josh Smith, who were certainly two bigger names that he had brought in, and kind of wanted to see what they could do with that second unit. And it was pretty much a disaster, I think it's fair to say. So he switched it up a bit. And I think the turning point actually came in a loss against the Thunder. I think I tweeted out that, even though they lost this game, I really saw a difference with the team in their togetherness and the way they played with the second unit. The way it's manifested itself is basically Pablo Prigioni has taken over the pure point guard duties for the second unit, allowing Jamal Crawford and Austin Rivers to basically attack the basket and play to their strengths, while meanwhile Cole Aldrich has been phenomenal in the pick and roll, both with Pablo and then recently when when DeAndre went out and he moved in the starting lineup, he did a really nice job with Chris Paul in that situation. So I think the spacing's improved. Their defensive efficiency's gone through the roof. And those are kind of the main things that have really happened, and their three-point shooting has taken off as well. So I'd say those are kind of the big overview things that have happened to this team that really sparked that 10-game winning streak.
So one of the things that the Clippers are always noted for is, kind of if their internal chemistry is where it needs to be. And, you being around the team for as long as you have been on a consistent basis, outside of the bench play now, obviously getting to be a little bit more productive on a regular basis, where do you see the chemistry line up in terms of, Chris Paul and DeAndre and Paul Pierce bringing that mix into things? How was the chemistry in the locker room, and how is that translating on the court?
It's really good. Paul Pierce has been a valuable voice, a valuable addition. Doc typically singles him out quite a bit in the postgame from things he'd said either at halftime or after the game to kind of rally the guys. The other night when they were down big against Miami, for instance, at halftime, Paul Pierce said, "Hey guys, we're going to win this game. We're just not making shots right now, but we're going to stick with it and come back and win." And sure enough, they did. And it's things like that I think are really valuable, and it takes some pressure off Chris Paul, Blake, and DeAndre, who have kind of been the three main voices in that locker room for the last 4 or 5 years that they played together. And now they've got somebody else with that veteran leadership who has a championship on their resume, and that's really valuable. And something else that I think is interesting, and we'll have to keep tracking, is that even with Lance Stevenson and Josh Smith falling out of the playing rotation, there was a chance for them to be a real problem in the locker room. And so far, at least, I haven't seen that or heard anything about that. I think they've both been pretty positive, even though obviously they're disappointed to not be playing at the same level they were earlier in the season. You have to give them credit for not being a distraction and not making it about themselves, particularly when the team's doing so well.
Ben, to follow up on that thought with regards to the status of Josh Smith and Lance Stevenson, because of the fact that they are not, part of that rotation and relied upon heavily like they were at the beginning of the season, could that possibly transcend the thought process that a move should be made or can be made with regards to Stevenson or Smith or both of them by the trade deadline?
Yeah, certainly I think it's something that they're looking at, and they're not going to hang up on anybody who calls them to acquire, but I'm not sure. I would say Lance would be the guy that more teams would be interested in, just because, he's younger, he's got more upside, I think, the rest of his career. He's also got a pretty good contract because next year is a team option. So I don't see a lot of movement or a lot of interest for Josh, but maybe I'm misreading the situation. I mean, certainly he could help somebody in the right spot. He was valuable to Houston last year, but just not a great fit with this team right now for a couple of reasons. One of them was, he's taking too many outside shots, which, that was encouraged in Houston whenever he stepped behind that three-point line, but got off to a really slow start this year with the Clippers, and when he kept hoisting those shots, you could just kind of feel the frustration level rising on the coaching staff, and Doc even admitted as much that was part of the reason he was taken out of the rotation. So I would say chances are probably less than 50% that either one of these guys gets moved by the trade deadline, but you just never know.
Well, we talk about this team and the streak that they've been on. We're not one of those shows that say, is a team better without their best player? But obviously, the Clippers have found a way to be very successful without Blake. When he does come back, and if you can kind of touch on the status of when that potentially may be, what's going to need to change? How is the rotation going to differ? In essence, who's going to be the odd man out when you see guys like Cole Aldridge now obviously producing? I know Unbutu slid into the starting lineup as well. What happens when Blake comes back, and how do they continue that success?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, first of all, obviously, Paul Pierce has done the bulk of the starting since Blake went down. Is going to have to go back to the second unit most likely, and he'll be fine with that. They can still fit him in and get him the minutes that he was getting. I don't see a big drop off for him, and certainly I don't think he's going to be any kind of like chemistry problem with a lesser role. But I think the more important thing is how do they keep spacing the floor like the way they're doing and getting those great looks that they were getting. The one thing that Cole has done that I would like to see Blake do more of is just a simple pick and roll. Blake has turned into largely and I'm not saying he doesn't go to the basket, but he's turned into a pretty big time jump shooter the last year or so. And, as effective and as good as he's been, I think the Clippers are at their best when he's actually attacking the basket a little bit more, and that frees up other guys and creates other opportunities with ball movement. And I think that, with Blake in the lineup, that's not happening. So I think that's one adjustment they need to look at. And doctors may think that's crazy, but I really think they do need to look at changing the way they play with Blake Griffin, because we've seen in this last 10 games, their offensive efficiency has just shot up tremendously without Blake Griffin, who clearly is arguably the most talented player on the floor. So I think that speaks to the system and something that they should take a look at trying to continue when Blake comes back.
Clippers beat writer for the LA Times, Ben Bolch, joining us here. Be sure to catch him on Twitter at LATBBolch. Ben, and as we talk about, Blake Griffin and the importance of what he will mean to this team coming back. I mean, the fact that he's averaging 23-8 is nothing to scoff at. But we've often talked about what it's going to take for this Clippers team to get to that next level. And clearly that was one of the big reasons why Doc Rivers, went out and tried to get Paul Pierce to this basketball team. And we've seen where this team somehow lacks a level of that, taking it to the, stepping it up when it has to. We thought that it happened last year in the playoffs when they broke through past the San Antonio Spurs after that Game 7. And so the one thing that I'm wondering is when Blake Griffin comes back, how will Paul Pierce's presence have that effect on guys like, Chris Paul and Blake Griffin? Because this team cannot see an NBA Finals without their aggressive play really being consistent, not just throughout the regular season, but when time comes for the playoffs. And we've seen where Paul Pierce has not been shy and letting everyone know about how he sees his teammates when they don't step up and show that leadership characteristics that he had himself when he used to be a Celtic.
Yeah, I think Paul's going to be nothing but an asset the rest of the season, no matter what his playing time is, just because, as you say, he will hold guys accountable, and he'll kind of be that coach on the floor, so to speak. When things aren't going great for the Clippers, he'll be able to step into the huddle and say, hey, look, guys, we need to do this, or, pick it up. We're not doing this. So I think that's going to be something that's going to help his team tremendously. And let's not forget, he won a game last year with clutch shooting and almost tied another one with that one that was disallowed because it was still on his fingertips. So he's got some real value. And I think, he's alluded to, this isn't the time of year when he's going to be his most valuable to the team. It's going to be in April, in May, when they need those clutch shots. And they need somebody to take some pressure off Chris Paul and Blake Griffin in in-the-game situations. And that's just going to give them a whole different dynamic and look that other teams are going to have to confront.
One of the things I've noticed about this team is obviously because Chris Paul has always had a great assist-to-turnover ratio, and they're, I think they're second in the league right now in terms of least turnovers per game. But they also are one of the leagues that get fouled the most, obviously because of the DeAndre Jordan situation, what the case may be. What is the, I think, one of maybe from you being on the team as much as you are, what is the greatest strength you see at this team currently? And then again, what's the greatest weakness outside of the free throw shooting?
I don't know. I would say greatest strength right now is just that they seem to figure out, and they've gotten a confidence from that. I think they've won 10 of their last 11 road games, which is just incredible. And to do that, you got to be not only playing well, but have a kind of a confidence and an aura about themselves. I won't say that they've become warriors-like, I think, because that's at a whole different level. But I do think they go into most games now expecting to win, and that was clearly not there, as recently as, I would say, 2 or 3 weeks ago. So, I've seen a big difference in that way. They've become a confidence bunch. As far as weakness, I would say that they've got some question marks hovering over them, and I think the big one, as we just spent some time talking about, is how are they going to integrate Blake Griffin back into the way they play? You think it would be a plus to add him back in, and it was last year, and I think last year will probably help them because they had a similar situation where they had a staph infection and came back in. And they picked up and had a pretty good close of the season to beat the Spurs in the playoffs. So, but I think fundamentally, as we talked about, I think they do need to look at, asking Blake to attack the basket just a little bit more, and I think that will make them just all the better on offense and a more dangerous team.
Ben Bolch joining us here on the Baseline NBA podcast. Ben, one person who I know has definitely benefited, and not to say this in a bad manner, but it is realistic because of how this offense is been schemed and what Doc Rivers did when he was coaching the Boston Celtics, and in the motion that is made for their two guards. The play of JJ Redick has really been pretty tremendous. He's actually, maybe not across the board what we're seeing from a shooting perspective, what we would all expect to see from a person like JJ Redick. But I think the fact that, he comes in and he consistently hits that shot, and he's a lot more confident. I see a little bit more grit in his game now as he's D'ing up guys on his position. And it, to me, it's like he's owning the moment a little bit more in the backcourt. What is it that you're seeing from JJ Redick that's yielding a little bit more confidence in not just Doc Rivers' ability to play him more and also to give him the ball more to shoot, but also what this is going to mean for the Clippers down the stretch when they don't have Paul Pierce on the court at the same time, or they don't have to just rely on the shooting of Chris Paul?
Yeah, he's a tremendous asset, and it's not just his shooting, it's his movement. I think that's the thing that gets overlooked a lot. His movement is such a nightmare matchup-wise for defenses that it causes them to commit, to him and be aware of where he is at all times. And that has a couple of effects. It not only does it disrupt the defense, but we were talking about this some the other day. Look at the offensive games of the guy matched up on him. They typically have worse than season average games going up against Redick just because of all the chasing and running him around the court. He kind of runs him ragged, so to speak. I've seen James Harden just have horrible shooting nights while matched up on Redick. So if you can do that, it has kind of a dual effect on the other team. And you're right. I think JJ Redick is kind of the unsung hero of this team in many ways and doesn't get nearly as much credit as he deserves.
All right, final two before we let you get out of here. I kind of one of the things we did touch on a little bit was the play of the bench in general, but more two guys and more specifically I want to talk about, and that's Jamal Crawford and Austin Rivers. There's a lot of people out there who don't think Austin Rivers would be in the league if Doc wasn't coaching this team, and then obviously the situation of Crawford potentially being moved over the summer and all that. Are both of those guys happy, and can both of those guys continue to contribute at a high level for this Clipper team the rest of the season?
Yeah, I don't see any reason why not. As we spoke about earlier, I think, having Pablo Prigioni as part of that second unit has really kind of revived both of them. They're both having their best stretches of the season, and I think it's safe to say that Austin's having, the best sustained stretch of his career. And really, I think, that's a tribute to Doc fighting through that first ugly 6 weeks of the season when it was looking bad for pretty much everybody on the bench, and trying a new matchup, mix and match with different guys. And finally they found something that's clicked, and it's benefited both of them. Jamal looks like, he's back to his scoring self, and Austin's attacking the basket and getting the free throw line and playing, really solid defense. So they're both doing what the Clippers need them to do. And that's been a huge lift for the team.
Okay, so assuming health, I'm going to ask you to put on your prediction hat here. Is this a team that can now finally potentially get over that hump in the playoffs and at least make it to the conference finals? Because, everyone's thinking, oh, it's the same old Clippers. They're going to get hot. They'll have a good regular season, but they're not going to be able to finish it off when it comes to playoff time. Again, you're there. You're around them all the time. You see them. You know what's going on. What is your gut feeling on this team and how far they can go this season?
Yeah, it's a great question. And the playoffs is all about matchups. And I think if I'm the Clippers, I really want to fight to get to that 3 seed, because if they're in the 4 seed, it'll probably be it's going to be a tough matchup no matter what. But 4 seed would entail playing the Warriors in the second round. And even though I think the Clippers would give them a battle, they'd probably lose in 6 games. So I would say if they can get to the 3 seed, they're not going to be afraid of, a Oklahoma City or San Antonio in the second round. Certainly, they've got some score to settle with the Thunder after that collapse a couple of years ago in the playoffs. So, I think if they can do that, then this could be the year they get to the conference finals. But I think it's going to be contingent on getting to that 3 seed, because I think if they're the 4, they just don't have enough to get past the Warriors.
He is the Clippers beat writer for the LA Times, an awesome writer at that. So you want to be sure, go to www.latimes.com. Look for Ben Bolch. Also catch him on Twitter at LATB Bolch. And yes, he may not hold Benoit Benjamin or Steve Ballmer's dance move accountable, but we will definitely hold these guys accountable. Ben, we really appreciate you jumping on with us for a few moments and giving us some insight on one of the more dangerous teams again in the LA Clippers as we continue forward into this season.
All right, thanks so much. That was a lot of fun.
All right. You're tuned to The Baseline. Cal Lee, Warren Shaw discussing the hot button topics of the NBA. And this was The Breakdown. Time now for The Drop. Cal Lee, Warren Shaw, The Baseline NBA Podcast. This week on The Drop, as we start trending closer to NBA All-Star Weekend, it's time for us to really kind of whip out, our periscopes and really start digging in and really start truly looking at what this first half of the season has meant for a lot of the teams here in the NBA. Now, we're not going to go through all 30 of the NBA teams. That's not the intention here. But let's be realistic. For most of us here in the media, most of us who watch these teams play, and you look at the records, you look at the performance, you look at the talent on the rosters, you have to be thinking to yourselves as we start getting closer to the All-Star break, and we are virtually at the midway point of an NBA season based on the games played, which teams are the most surprising? Which teams are the most disappointing, right? I mean, it's very easy to say the Golden State Warriors are having a legendary type season. But on the other side of the scale, which team at the beginning of the season were we looking at saying who should be knocking off this Golden State Warriors team that everyone said lucked themselves into winning an NBA title when LeBron James didn't have his full roster of henchmen rolling with him into the finals? When you look at the rosters and you look at the records, it has to make you wonder, Shaw, which teams really have been the most surprising so far this season and which team has really been the most disappointing. So I'm going to let you start it off. Let's start off with teams that have really surprised you so far this first half of the season, not just by record, but also with their competitive play.
I think, this is one of those questions and things out there we'd love to get some even feedback on a regular basis, put it out there if we tweet it and things like that. And when I look at the standings and kind of look how this season has kind of played itself off a little bit, I think I'm most impressed with the Orlando Magic, where I thought they'd be. I mean, I figured this would be a year they could potentially take a step forward. Wasn't too sure how Scott Skiles would manage this roster on this team, but they're above 500 team as a recording of the show. They hit a little bit of a rough patch. I think they're 3-7 in their last 10 games. Actually, that just goes to show you where they were. But now they have some injuries, and Oladipo's I think banged up, and Peyton was banged up for a little while. But really, how this team has galvanized itself, playing great defense, and what he's been able to get out of that team from a bench standpoint too has surprised me. Definitely for the better. And the Dallas Mavericks, I really just didn't think this team. And it just goes to show you what a great coach Rick Carlisle is. I just didn't think this team could be sitting second in the Southwest Division, and that's probably more of an indictment, if you will, on some of the other teams in the Southwest that haven't lived up to their expectations. But to me, Dallas and Orlando are two of the better surprises, I think, in the NBA this season.
Yeah, look, to talk with reference to the Orlando Magic, this is a team, Shaw, that only had 25 wins last season, and already they have 20 at the midway point. And that to me speaks volumes on a head coach who I was really skeptical about them hiring. Not because I don't think Scott Skiles is a good coach. I just didn't know whether or not he was a good coach for the kind of players that he has to work with. But he has clearly got these guys bought into, one, playing better defense, which is really not, which has been the lost mantra of the Orlando Magic. We often talk about what Stan Van Gundy did with this Magic team, back from, 2005 to 2010. We talk about what this Magic team had because they shoot the three and, he wasn't afraid to get these guys to jack up shots, but they played great defense. And Dwight Howard's, superstar status was hinged upon him being the anchor of a good defensive basketball team. And that's what we're seeing the Orlando Magic getting back to doing, that while they have young thoroughbreds on that basketball court, they're getting back and they're playing defense. And that's what's got them hanging around in the Southeast Division. I mean, they're better than the Washington Wizards right now, who we said should ultimately be, if not first, but second in their own division and should be a top 3 to 5 team in the Eastern Conference playoff picture. So I completely agree with you there with the Magic. And as in reference to the Dallas Mavericks, this is a phenomenal job in what we've have said is arguably the toughest division in all of the NBA. I think at the beginning of the year when we were making our predictions about where this Mavericks team is, I think you had them at the bottom, literally. Like you look at what they're up against. Their Pelicans are supposed to be a team that's supposed to be improved, especially coming off of getting into the playoffs. But this Mavericks team has steadfast. They got quality guys. The play of Wesley Matthews, I cannot stress enough how sometimes the numbers don't really tell the true tale of what a player can do for a locker room. There are guys that are really playing above their heads right now. And I think a lot of it is because when you got an Iron Man kind of guy like Wesley Matthews in that locker room, it makes it really easy for a leader like Dirk Nowitzki to latch on to someone to really channel what he expects from his players and what Rick Carlisle wants his players to do, not just from an offensive perspective, but from a defensive perspective as well.
Yeah, I mean, I love Wes Matthews and the fact that he's been able to come back, and the caveat.
And he's been healthy. He's been healthy.
The caveat to what the Mavericks have been able to do is that, say exactly that. Matthews has come back from that Achilles rupture. Then he had Chandler Parsons battling. Both of those guys were on a minutes restriction to begin the year, and are just now starting to play regular minutes, 30 plus a night. So the fact that they are where they are with those two guys pretty much being hobbled the entire year is a testament to the great job the Mavericks have done. Obviously, in Dirk Nowitzki, who we've highlighted on the show earlier in the season, is basically having a kind of like a resurgence, if you will. He's been truly vintage Dirk, but the guy who I think has been holding it all together. And most people, and no one is understanding why. And I kind of dissed him on last week's show, in terms of the All-Star voting.
Don't say that name. Don't say that name. Don't say that name.
It's Zaza Pachulia, man.
You know what, though? You're right, bro. You're right. You're right.
That guy has really held things down for them, on both sides of the basketball. One of the few players in the NBA right now averaging a double-double, basically 11 and 11. And just doing so many great things for them, offensively, defensively, and again, remember this. When we had John Hammond, GM for the Bucks, on our show, he said Zaza was a guy they really, really were sad that they had to lose. And at the time, I just kind of was like, okay, well, hey, he was a great guy in the locker room. But you kind of see what he was talking about now because he's doing so many great things for them, holding down that center position in Dallas.
Yeah, well, and also one other thing is you see what Rick Carlisle is doing for a guy like Zaza Pachulia. We talk about how certain players get transitioned to other teams and tend to get lost in that system because the coaches really have no faith. I mean, you look at right now with Chicago and Fred Hoiberg and the situation with Joakim Noah. I don't care who you are. I don't care what kind of coach you are. A player like Joakim Noah and what he was able to do for this Chicago Bulls team over the last 4 years, especially with what's happened with Derrick Rose, a guy like that should not be laid to waste seeing reduced minutes. And yes, we'll talk about his injury and what effect that's going to mean. But his presence and what he brings to that Chicago Bulls team was the identity of that Chicago Bulls team when there was no identity. And to me, it just speaks volumes about how the right coach can manufacture what's needed to yield success for a basketball team that may not have their all-star roster that everyone, tends to have with the Cleveland Cavaliers and the Golden State Warriors and the Houston Rockets of the NBA. What Carlisle is doing, and to your credit and what you just mentioned, Shaw, for Zaza Pachulia is rejuvenating what we had talked about what Zaza Pachulia was doing for the Atlanta Hawks for many of those years when Al Horford wasn't fully healthy and when they couldn't get that combination of Horford and Johnson and Smith together. Zaza Pachulia came in there and gave the Hawks an identity, a fire, a grit, a toughness about him, something that the Mavericks had when they went on that championship run in 2011, man.
Yeah, he's definitely been an asset to them, and as they've been waiting for JaVale McGee to even kind of get healthy and try to contribute off the bench, and that's been coming to fruition for a little bit. I really do feel like as much credit as Wesley Matthews and Chandler Parsons and obviously Dirk Nowitzki deserve, Zaza Pachulia, I think, has been the glue really to this team, especially in that starting lineup. He's pretty much played in every single game this year. Everybody else has missed time for various reasons, one way or the other. I think Dirk's been pretty healthy as well. But even Darren Williams and again him kind of having a little bit of resurgence now that the pressure's off of him from being out of Brooklyn. But I just love what Zaza's been able to do and what the Mavericks in general have been able to do. Those are, again, Dallas and Orlando, my two surprise teams in the Eastern Western Conference this year.
All right. Well, so my two surprising teams. And look, I've talked about these guys because I believed in what they are capable of being. A young team, a team that I think is trying to kind of rekindle that bad boy mentality, that swagger that Pistons fans used to love, back in the 90s. But what we're talking about here is Detroit Pistons basketball. And Reggie Jackson and Andre Drummond are leading the forefront of it. You have a savvy coach in Stan Van Gundy, which I think now that he is actually getting into, the dirt, like he's putting his hands in it and he's kind of forming the team that he wants to see. He's got a young phenom in Drummond, and what these guys are doing right now in a very tough Central Division. I mean, when you look at it for what it is, Shaw, the Cleveland Cavaliers, the Chicago Bulls, surprisingly, obviously the Indiana Pacers and their play, but I think a lot of it is largely in part because of Paul George. So we knew that this team was going to be a good basketball team when he came back. But when we're talking about the Milwaukee Bucks, and I'm pretty sure you're probably going to be putting them in the conversation of disappointing teams, I still talk about what the Detroit Pistons have been able to do, and despite that, because I think it's supposed to be the second most difficult division to win out of. What the Pistons are doing right now at the halfway point, to me, very surprising, and I'm very glad to see what they're doing. And another team that I'm really surprised at, and I say this because the record does not reflect the competitive play that you're seeing from them, the Portland Trailblazers. Even though this Trailblazers team is 7 games under 500, and the Northwest Division viably is really one of the weakest divisions in all of the NBA. But when you watch the Portland Trailblazers play, to go through what the Trailblazers went through and the roster that Terry Stotts is working with, the emergence of C.J. McCollum, especially during that period when Damian Lillard was down due to the plantar fasciitis, and what Damian Lillard has been doing for this Portland Trailblazers team to even have 18 wins in this division right now, to me, I think speaks volumes of the patience that Terry Stotts is showing and the steadfast play and the growth and maturity that he's getting from some of the guys like Mason Plumlee, Myers Leonard, Al-Farouq Aminu. These guys are stepping up and they're playing competitive basketball, and to be third in this division and really just be kind of on the outside looking in, possibly to still sneak into the playoffs at this juncture, very impressed by the Portland Trailblazers, man.
And I think those are both great selections. Obviously we know you're the semi on that Pistons bandwagon one way or the other, but they really
somehow, some way, baby. I got to put them in there.
Yeah, they play great basketball. They don't really turn the ball over that much, especially when you figure Reggie Jackson is a guy who is a little erratic at times. The Pistons are actually only eighth in turnovers per game right now, which is, in terms of having the least amount of turnovers, only 14 turnovers per game. And I am really surprised by that. And obviously Drummond being the beast that he is, leading the league in double-doubles and rebounding in general, just love what they've been able to kind of figure out. And another key guy on that team too, KCP is a guy who has started to come on last year. He's played great basketball, but the guy to me is Marcus Morris, and really just, it's all about getting the opportunity. And as you said a little earlier with the Carlisle segment, is having a coach believe in you, and what you've been able to do. And Morris has come in at that 3 position. I think he's averaging the most amount of minutes on the team currently, and just plays. And it got that he's this phenomenal statistic guy who fills up the box score on a regular basis, but he's doing what he needs to do, and he's giving them a little bit of that grit, if you will, and that physical play at that 3 position, and it can go to the 4 at times as well. That's why I think, Detroit has been so successful, because they really are getting a lot of great production from their starting lineup.
It does make you wonder, though, if you were the Phoenix Suns, if whether or not Ryan McDonough had traded the Wright Morris out of Phoenix, though, doesn't it?
It definitely does. Yeah,
you go through all that trouble and you send the one dude out there who's literally a workhorse for another basketball team to help them have a successful record, and yet you got the one who's basically sulking and throwing towels at coaches, and he wants to be traded. I'm just saying, it kind of throws the arrow right back at the GM of the Phoenix Suns, and making Suns fans start to question, like, yo, what are you doing, man? Because we talked about how the Morris twins really are a great product when they came out of Kansas. And obviously that whole stigma that they need to be playing together. I get all of that, but you take nothing away from the fact that these guys are quality assets on any basketball team if given the opportunity. And we're seeing what a team like the Detroit Pistons are valued at now, having a guy like Marcus Morris on their team.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I didn't miss KCP's, since I think Morris battled a couple of injuries, KCP's now leading the team in minutes played, by a minute or so over Morris. But in general, I said they're playing great basketball. And to your other point, too, with the Portland Trailblazers, it's kind of leads me into the next part of the segment in terms of I'm disappointed in the Western Conference kind of on a whole. And, for a team like Portland, who I don't really see to be that great, that they're able to amass the amount of wins that they have and now be competitive for that 8th and final playoff spot in the Western Conference, which I wrote them off. I said there was no chance they could compete for a playoff spot in the West, but because the conference in general has not been so good outside of the top 3 or maybe even 4 teams, it's given a team like Portland that chance and that ability to really turn things on. And, kudos to Damian Lillard. He's now really starting to come on the last 3 to 5 games where we're seeing, okay, he's putting up some extremely gaudy numbers. But obviously McCollum is a guy who we knew was going to take a big step forward, but they haven't really gotten the production from guys who I thought, like Myers Leonard and even Ed Davis. I think they've really been up and down kind of throughout the season. And that to me says a lot that they have a lot of room for improvement, and they really can make a push in the Western Conference, because outside of Lillard and McCollum, not too many guys have played very, very well for them. I think Amino's played decently at times. Not to discredit for what he's been able to do. Alan Crabb has played well off the bench, but I really don't feel like this team has even scratched the surface on what they could potentially become, especially in a weakened Western Conference. They could probably do a little bit better than they have done thus far.
All right, you're tuned to the Baseline. Cal Lee, Warren Shaw, discussing the hot button topics of the NBA, our segment of the drop. Surprising teams in the NBA, who is really coming out of their shell and making things happen this NBA season. Well, now let's go ahead and transition to the teams that have really disappointed us thus far this season, Shaw. I'm going to go ahead and let you start it off, obviously, rolling out the red carpet to my man 50 Grand here. Who has really disappointed you so far in what you've seen in the NBA season?
Well, there's a lot of teams, and as I just said, the Western Conference on a whole has really not been what I would expected it to be. But I figure everybody would know who the most disappointing team in the Western Conference is right now, and that would be the New Orleans Pelicans. Yes, Alvin Gentry came there with the mindset that he was going to improve this offense, and everyone's all this talk. Anthony Davis is going to shoot threes this year, and it's just going to be so wonderful and so great. It hasn't translated itself. They are an atrocious, historically atrocious defensive team right now, and they just can't stay healthy, even though they're now starting to turn things around a little bit. Drew Holiday is finally off his minutes restriction, and they've played a little bit better as of late, 4-6 in their last sentence of recording of this show. But this is a team that I really thought was going to be a lot better. I think everybody did and was hoping AD, potential MVP candidate. That's not even in the cards right now. And he's not even necessarily one of the leading vote getters in the Western Conference in terms of making the All-Star team as a starter. Obviously, he'll be there, but that just goes to show you how far the Pelicans have fallen off in general. And you alluded to it a little bit, about my most disappointing, Eastern Conference team. But it's not the Bucks. I mean, I just felt like that team has so many things they needed to figure out, and integrating Jabari back into the mold. That's been frustrating. I think, to watch, and I think I'd put them right up there with the Washington Wizards. Again, the Wizards have played a little bit better as of late too, but I thought the Wizards were a team that should be competing to really be at the forefront of the Southeast Division. They've had some real ups and downs this year. Same thing, battling injuries. Bradley Beal's been in and out of the lineup. He's finally back now. John Wall had an atrocious start to the season and then has really turned it on. And has been, kind of magnanimous in the last, 15 to 20 games or so. But he was really, really bad. He's one of the league leaders in turnovers still at this point in the season. To me, the Wizards and the Bucks too, but more so the Wizards, because where I thought they should have been so far at this point in the season.
Well, I completely agree with you, with reference to the New Orleans Pelicans. They could easily be my first pick as being one of the most disappointing teams. But shall I go back to my hesitance in the hiring of Alvin Gentry and the reasons why they thought Alvin Gentry was going to be a good fit for this Pelicans team. This Pelicans team got to the playoffs last year because they played defense. And you can clearly see that they have so gotten away from doing that. And when you have a defensive anchor, a juggernaut like Anthony Davis, who's now more fixated on being the offensive carrier for this team. I mean, clearly he's the best player on the basketball court, but ultimately he's basically got a shoulder to do everything. You are putting way too much on a person like Anthony Davis's ilk. And at some point, something is going to give. And you can see clearly from a defensive perspective, nobody fears the Pelicans quite the same like they did last year. And I'm not saying that it's Gentry's fault, but I'm saying this is what happens when you take a defensive-minded coach who helps this team improve their defensive play to get them in the playoffs, and then you bring in an offensive-minded coach who says you guys need to score the basketball better, but then their defense suddenly just disappears. This is going to be a team that is going to struggle, and I'm just wondering if whether or not Gentry, I don't know whether or not the patience is going to be there when you have the type of player in Anthony Davis that they can allow this kind of season to happen, and you don't start, taking that clock and you start turning it on and saying, is this on Gentry? So that's all I'm going to say with regards to the Pelicans. Ultimately, one of two things has got to happen. If you're going to truly believe in Alvin Gentry and him helping this team become a better offensive team, it can't be with the ensemble cast that they have right now. Somebody's got to go from that Pelicans starting lineup. I know they've been talking about moving Ryan Anderson and company, but Gordon, Holiday, Evans, that combination is not going to work for what Gentry wants to do. And ultimately, if this team is going to play better basketball for this season, they have to get better defensively. I don't know how they're going to be able to do that given in the division that they're playing in. To your point about the Washington Wizards, no question. This is a team falling way short of expectations. I will not be surprised if we really start having these conversations about whether or not Randy Whitman should still be the head coach, because you clearly cannot look at this roster and say, how are you guys playing under 500? How are you not leading the division, a division where the Atlanta Hawks are better than you? There's no conceivable answer except for this team just doesn't have what it takes. And maybe it brings to the whole phenomena about Paul Pierce's, interpretations about what he saw from those guys in Wall and Beal and what it's going to take for them to start playing the kind of basketball that we can actually say with convincing nature that they are a top 3 team in the Eastern Conference. I completely agree with you there. I'm going to go with, you spoke on it, I'm speaking on it. I think the Milwaukee Bucks are really the most disappointing team. While they're 18-25 so far at the halfway point, Shaw, what's really disappointed me about this team is that they're not even playing what made them, what we talked about them so much. There's no defensive desire in this team. I'm not seeing it. I don't want to say it's on Greg Monroe, but clearly Greg Monroe is not your best defensive player. You clearly brought him in there to be a better team from the perimeter, but this team has gotten so far away from what made them successful last year to get into the playoffs, which is playing good defense. All of their defensive numbers have dropped from last season to this season. And even still, while they're trying to implement Jabari Parker into the offense, the load of it is not on Jabari Parker. It's still on the play of Michael Carter-Williams, who I think is having a disastrous season. And he's supposed to be that guy that Jason Kidd is leaning on to be the future of the Bucks, to headstrong this innovative offense that they're supposed to be doing. I'm just saying, watch very closely for what happens for them in the second half of the season, because if it comes down to a point where they have to start shaking up that lineup, it might be because Michael Carter-Williams is not getting these guys to play inspired basketball in a division now that clearly is a lot tougher than maybe we had thought it was going to be at the beginning of the season. Yeah. Ultimately, ultimately, Shaw, my final disappointing team is the Houston Rockets. I listen, 21-20 might seem like, well, the Rockets are still a good basketball team. This is a team that finished second in the Western Conference last season, basically. This is a team that everyone said, you know what, with the roster that they have, a year under their belt, and you look at the turmoil that happened, letting go of Kevin McHale, JB Bickerstaff coming in, nothing has changed, and you've got a perennial MVP player in James Harden. This team does not play like a team that wants to even sniff being in the playoffs right now, and they're in danger of taking themselves out of it when a team like the Portland Trailblazers are only a couple of games behind them in the playoff chase. To me, you can't be more disappointed than seeing the Houston Rockets and their effort in what they've been doing thus far this season. Too much bickering, too much yakking off in social media and stuff. To me, it's just it's a recipe for disaster. Would not be surprised if this Houston Rockets team doesn't even make the playoffs this year.
Well, both teams you mentioned have fallen dramatically in defensive rating and things like that. The Bucks are 29th right now, which is not even remotely close to where they were a season ago. And the one thing I can say for them is actually Jason Kidd has been out with, I think, the hip surgery, and their assistant coach has taken over. They have been playing a little bit better, and I think it's Greg Foster. He's tightened up the rotations a little bit. Milwaukee is a team that likes to play 10, 11 guys. They've been going more to the 8, 9-man rotation in recent games, and a lot of that has to do with injuries and things like that too. But I think you're starting to see that might be the mold where they need to kind of figure some things out. OJ Mayo has been out, and Bayless has been out of the lineup in and out. And I agree, MCW has not lived up to expectations on a regular basis. He's had a couple nice games here and there. But I think the key is also now getting Jabari back and involved. And if he can get this defense turned around to some degree, because Chris Middleton is playing at a almost at an all-star level to me, really been consistent offensively for them for the entire season. And Giannis as well starting to turn things around. I think this Bucks team is a team that really scares some teams now in the second half of the season, the true second half of the season in the Eastern Conference. But hard to disagree with where your assessment of the Houston Rockets. Everybody sees that this is a failed experiment, bringing Ty Lawson over there. Even firing McHale, it me seems to be like that was a little bit premature. We talked about that, their early struggles. Yes, they're hovering around 500. Yes, right now they're currently in a playoff spot in the Western Conference, and I'm not sure there's anybody that's dying to meet them if this roster was to stay the same. But I think this is a team that you might see start to break things up. They're going to try to find a home for Ty Lawson if possible by the trade deadline. Don't know that happens. Obviously, there's been talk about Dwight Howard being moved. Jones as well is another guy who they've been talking about potentially moving. So many things can happen with this Houston Rockets team. I just don't feel like this is a championship level team, and they're nowhere near where they were a season ago.
Honorable mention, Shaw. Ones that we probably have not been able to talk about with extensively. Who would you consider as an honorable mention of a team that's really surprised you? That should be deserving of a definite look as we go into the second half of the season.
I would say, and no one's really gonna understand my assessment of this right now, but it would be kind of the Pacers and even the Spurs to some degree. The Pacers, because I didn't think Paul George was going to come back and be as dominant as he was. I mean, we heard all the rumors, and they've been working hard and the whole nine. I just didn't know how this would translate with them trying to play smaller. Paul George at the 4. Then they flip-flop that. C.J. Miles is playing the 4. Monte Ellis hasn't even had a very, very good season, but the Pacers, to me, are a little bit still of a surprise to see that, hey, you know what? At one point, they were third in the Eastern Conference, and anywhere between 3 and 8, or really 3 through 10 right now, you can basically just fall with the loss of one game. But Indiana, for me, and the reason why I say the Spurs is I just thought it would have taken a little bit longer for this to mesh, and I didn't see Kawhi taking the leap that he's taken to really be outside of, obviously, Stephen Curry, and some of those other players. Like if Steph wasn't doing what he was doing, you really would be hearing more about Kawhi as a potential MVP candidate on this roster. And the same thing, Aldridge statistically hasn't been what I thought he was going to be. I really thought it was going to take them a longer time to get this together. But as we look right now, as recording this show, they're just 2 games out of the first place in the Western Conference. With how great Golden State has been, the Spurs are just 2 games back of Golden State, and a lot of it has to do with Kawhi Leonard and just what the Spurs have been able to do in general. So to me, those 2 teams, I honorable with the mention, and I know the Spurs, everyone's like, they're supposed to be good, but I didn't see them being this dominant this early.
Yeah, my honorable mention, Shaw, real quick, is one, the Memphis Grizzlies. Listen, they are about as old school as you can get. And I don't mean old in the word school together in that kind of sense. I'm talking old. I mean, you have to see what Coach Yeager has been able to do with this roster and still have these guys playing above 500 basketball, to still have them competitive in the Southwest Division. I mean, yes, they're probably a social security number away, social security check away from this roster getting etched out of existence because of how old they are in comparison to how the rest of the league plays. But they still play the kind of basketball that is a nuisance to a lot of these teams that we're talking about, in the Thunder, the Warriors, the Clippers. They still play competitive basketball, and the fact that they are still in the mix and in the running, given the division that they're playing in, I'm still really surprised. They just find a way to win games. And the other team, Shaw, New York Knicks, man. I mean, look, what can we say? 20 wins already. They've already, they're surpassing what they were able to do last season. This is a team that could possibly even make the playoffs, and they're really not getting it from this all-star caliber level of play from Carmelo Anthony. It's from Kristaps Porzingis, and I definitely think that this is a team you want to look for in the second half of the season to see what kind of noise that they could possibly make. They're not above 500, but they're a lot closer to being a much better basketball team than we can say for a team like the Washington Wizards. All good stuff, man, and this is just really going to be some great things to look forward to as we start moving forward into the second half of the NBA season. You're tuned to The Baseline. Cal Lee, Warren Shaw discussing the hot button topics of the NBA, and this was The Drop.
Coast to coast.
Time now to go coast to coast discussing the news in the association. You ready to rock and roll, Mr. Shaw?
Absolutely, man. Let's ride.
All right. Well, the big news out in Chicago, Joakim Noah, you could basically say his season is done, out to 4 to 6 months with a separated shoulder. It was quoted by Fred Hoiberg that the loss of Noah is tough on everybody. Are you buying into Hoiberg's soliloquy of how Joakim Noah not being on this team for the remainder of this season is really hurting this Bulls team from what they're doing?
Yeah, and from a dual points, if you will. Obviously, because of Noah, when he's healthy, what he's been able to do production-wise, but it limits Chicago's trade opportunities now, too. There was rumors that Pau Gasol might have been on the trading block as he's going to opt out, that Noah himself would have been on the trading block, Taj Gibson was on the trading block. Now it limits their opportunities and potential to go out there and try to find another wing player, because Dunleavy's still a few weeks from even stepping on the court and practicing. So yeah, I believe Hoiberg believes that this is a big loss for them because it limits them what they're being able to do, whether that be trading or whether even if they're going to try to keep Noah on the court.
All right, out in Memphis, and we just finished talking about the surprising play of the Grizzlies and the fact that they still win basketball games. They're going to have to do it without Mike Conley, who's officially injured his Achilles. There's no set return date. But Shaw, man, Mario Chalmers is playing like Super Mario's, like video game type numbers, helping this Grizzlies team win. Are they going to suffer that tremendously without Mike Conley?
Well, I know Mario Chalmers is inside grilling and hoping that Conley, takes as long as necessary for him to come back.
Just chill, man. To take as much time as you need. I got it.
But, I think there's an early report now that Conley might be back this week, that there's some potential of that. The Achilles injury was only supposed to be 2 games. I think it's been 6 games right now. So we'll see. With the Achilles, it's just one of those things. We don't know what the exact return date is, but there's some reports now that Conley may be back as early as next week, which much of the chagrin of Mario Chalmers.
All right, out in Miami, Goran the Dragon Dragic, he suffers a calf strain. He'll be evaluated in about 7 to 10 days. Shaw, how big of a major blow is this for the Miami Heat and their ascension, so to speak, to being one of the top teams in the Southeast?
Well, I mean, it hurts because Dragic was finally starting to turn around and play some good basketball. I think it started with the road trip. Obviously, he was playing against his former team in Phoenix, so he had a little bit extra motivation. But really, the whole trip, he was playing pretty well, and now he gets the setback finally as he used to turn things around. Hopefully, Udrich and Tyler Johnson will be able to step up, and hopefully Dragic will not be out that long, which you'll probably see a lot of Dwayne Wade handling the basketball, but he's also been banged up as well. So Miami has some things they need to figure out at the point guard position, but hopefully Dragic will be back pretty soon to kind of quash those any concerns.
All right, out in La La Land, Kobe Bryant, his injuries starting to flare up again. So it sounds like Byron Scott may be talking about resting him up. And there's been speculation about whether or not Kobe Bryant is willing to play in Brazil for the Olympics for 2016. he sounds like he's ready to, he's closing the door on that. That's not really a priority, and that's not something that he's even thinking about. Are you buying on, the idea that Byron Scott is going to really look to try and rest Kobe as they continue in his farewell tour? And then what about him basically not even acknowledging the idea that he thinks that he wants to play for the Olympics?
Well, I mean, he's killed it himself. He said, listen, you know what? He just really doesn't feel like this is something that he needs to do and to take an opportunity away from somebody else. So I can give him credit for that with the Olympic thing. I think, but from more of a selfish standpoint, I think he's enjoyed the farewell tour more than he thought he would. So that's why he's trying to go out and, really kill himself to play in all these games against teams that he's not going to have a chance to visit again, at least not, from a basketball player standpoint. I do feel like they're going to need to sit him down for a little while. I think if there are games where he can go, where he knows he's already returned there at least one time previously, or whether or not they may have a chance to get back down to there at another point in the season, you're going to see Kobe start resting and maybe playing 1 or 2 games a week, because I really feel like his body is breaking down. They just need to push him, and that gives them an opportunity to get some of the younger guys out there, Lou Williams, Clarkson, D'Angelo Russell as well. All those guys need minutes, and Kobe's kind of just not necessarily in the way right now, but his injuries aren't what the Lakers need to be seeing on the court on a regular basis.
All right, out in Detroit, the fro is being raised up the rafters. Ben Wallace, his number is going to be retired as a Detroit Pistons. Shaw, we remember the days of Big Ben doing his thing, helping the Pistons win championships. So, what does it mean to you to see Big Ben Wallace, fear the fro, just like we got fear the deer and fear everything else, fear the fro, finally being retired in the Detroit Pistons echelons?
It was a nice move for Detroit. They did it in a win against the Golden State Warriors too. So I think that made Ben Wallace feel even a little bit better. But just goes to show you that a guy like Wallace, who wasn't a heavy offensive player and didn't do a lot on that side of the basketball, but was defensive oriented, rebounding. He's a guy who really knew how to kind of sacrifice of himself and contribute without having an effect on the game offensively. And to be recognized by the Pistons, one of the historical franchises of the NBA, I think it's kudos and definitely a salute to Wallace and to the Pistons organization for recognizing what he was able to do for that during his time there.
All right. Out in, really the D-League, and, we've had our conversations about stuff happening with the D-League showcase and everything like that. Well, it looks like there's going to be a ton of call-ups due, especially as teams start to add more depth and a little bit playmaking to their squad. Baron Davis, BD, he himself is signed up into the D-League, and he's basically starting that comeback tour. So is it really coming to fruition? Are we going to see BD in the NBA?
No. We would definitely not see BD in the NBA, unless it's at the very end of the season on a 10-day contract, somebody's trying to sell some tickets, and that would probably be like a team like Charlotte or something like that where he's played previously. But he went undrafted, and he is a free agent, can sign on any D-League team simply because, nobody seems to want to take that chance on him right now. All the best for him, but on the bright side of things for the D-League, you're just starting to see some of these guys get called up. You saw Kilpatrick, one of the guys that Chris Reichert had spoke about, a hot shooter. He's come out and he's got his call up as well. So Lorenzo Brown get called up, by the Phoenix Suns. So just some of these names you're going to see right now, and it's good to see that the D-League is making the impact that exactly for its desired and intended purpose on the NBA.
All right, and down in Miami, Hassan Whiteside doing what Hassan Whiteside does, getting your unconventional triple dubs with the blocks, man. I mean, listen, man, if you're a big man, this is what you got to do. You don't do it with points, rebounds, and assists. You do it with points, rebounds, and blocks.
Yeah, and he's talking that smack, He let everybody know, ain't nobody out here doing it like me. And I think he's only the third player in the last, I think 5 seasons or so to be able to do that. And he's done it twice in the last 2 seasons, if you will. And he's basically calling out Draymond Green, who's been amassing his triple-doubles with assists. They have that little Twitter beef from a season ago. I can't wait to see Golden State and the Miami Heat play soon. Hopefully Draymond and Whiteside will both be on the court so we can see some of that on-court banter.
Oh, my God, the Jordan will be just tremendous. It's just I cannot wait to see that happen as well, too. Finally, Shaw, Iman Shumpert, man, listen, he's had himself a phenomenal year. I mean, made it to the NBA Finals. His fiance, they have a child, and now my man is entering in the rap game, releasing a mixtape. I mean,
yeah, boy.
Shump getting people to shake that rump. So what do we make about Iman Shumpert, on his worst behavior?
I think this is one of those fun things because you see these rappers, a lot of them, they want to be ball players, and we see that all the time. And and ball players want to be rappers. And Iman Shumpert and even Damian Lillard, They're two guys who have been able to kind of really take that step, if you will, on another side of their career, if you will. They're both are deemed to be very good artists. A little more so than Shumpert right now, but you got to get that Shumpman mixtape, Shumpman the MD, if you can get that on .piff or whatever your mix site outlet may be. Iman Shumpert is definitely trying to set himself up for life outside of the NBA, bro.
Yeah, listen, man, he's an entrepreneur. He's a businessman, baby. What more can we say? It can't just be on the high top fade for Iman Shumpert. Awesome show, Shaw. I mean, great stuff all around. The Clippers, a team that people really need to start watching as we start looking at the second half of the season. And then, we talk about the teams that have really surprised us this year, teams that have so far been a disappointment, but there's still a lot of basketball left to be played. We don't know how the storylines are going to play out, but for right now, what we can say is that there's some compelling basketball that still needs to be left out there on that basketball court.
Yeah, lots of games to be played, and some of these teams can turn things around. Obviously, we'll see some trades and things like that here and there as teams try to figure out what direction they really need to be going. Obviously, big salary cap year, too, in terms of the summer and free agency. So lots and lots still to be decided. And if your team is one of the teams that we bagged on a little bit, fear not. Hopefully they can turn some things around and make some of the right decisions to have a better and more successful second half of the NBA season. But if not, make sure you still tune in, because we'll make sure to let you know what they did wrong, in the coming weeks.
Most definitely, man. So for the Baseline, Callie, Warren Shaw, we'd like to thank our special guest, Ben Bolch from the LA Times. He's the Clippers beat writer, so be sure to check him out and check out the articles that he writes. And we'd like to thank you and yours once again for supporting us. For the Baseline, Callie, Warren Shaw, we appreciate you, and we'll catch up with you next time.